In the meantime, have a Bible at the ready. We're going to spend some time in the Word this morning. I do want to say thank you for being here, whether you're here in person or joining us online. It is good to see you. This morning, I am not going to take time to provide a lengthy foundation or really establish a foundation for my thoughts. That's kind of my custom, to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes laying a foundation. This morning, I want to kind of launch right in, if that's okay. And it is because I have the mic. I want to get right into a study on the love of God. The love of God. And I want to begin by giving you 2 notes regarding God's love, 2 elements of its nature. Number 1, for my note takers, Lord bless the note takers, and Lord bless those who can memorize this by hearing it once. Number 1, there is an unconditional aspect to the love of God. Whatever we say biblically about the love of God, we can say this: it's unconditional. Well, what does that mean? It means a few things. Number 1 is it means that it's not founded upon your worthiness, loveliness, or utility. God doesn't love you because you have it all together. And He doesn't love you because of the benefit that you can provide to Him, utility. What do you really have to offer the Lord that He can't get somewhere else in a better fashion? You know, we worship, and I love worshiping with you folks, but I'm sure God can create beings that sound better and always hit every note perfectly. But He still revels in the worship of His people. Why? Because He loves us. So God's love is not based upon how well you can behave, what you can offer to Him. He just loves you, period. Don't add a but to that. And the second aspect is that His love endures or persists even when you fail. And this is a tough biblical point, but it's true. He even loves people unconditionally who reject and spurn His love. Well, you say, Pastor, does the Lord love the people that are suffering in hell? You ready for the answer? Yes. They're there because of their choices, not because of His. He made every way for such a one to be saved out of love. If we reject that, that's on us. That's not on Him. God demonstrates His own love for us in this, the Bible says. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That phrase is important, while we were still sinners. You could add some other terms into that. While we rejected Him, while we operated as enemies, He still loved us enough to give His Son. I love what it says in Ephesians chapter 2. As for you, speaking to believers, you were dead in your sins and transgressions, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, speaking of Satan. All of us, Paul says, lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, and this is a frightening phrase, we were by nature objects of wrath. But because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. For it's by grace you have been saved. What that verse is saying is that whatever God has done to establish the plan of salvation, it is not founded on us or our worthiness or what we have to offer. It is based solely on the grace and on the love of Jesus Christ. I've read this before, but I'll share it again. There was a certain medieval monk who announced that he'd be preaching next Sunday evening on the love of God. As the shadows fell and the light ceased to come in through the cathedral windows, the congregation began to gather. In the darkness of the altar, the monk lighted a single candle and carried it to the crucifix. First of all, he illuminated the crown of thorns. Next, the 2 wounded hands. Then the marks of the spear wound. And it concludes that in the hush that fell, he blew out the candle and left the chapel, for there was nothing left to say. This is love. Not that we loved Him first, but that He first loved us. That's point number 1. There is an unconditional nature to God's love. Number 2, there is an immensity to the love of God. And while I begin to elaborate on this point, let's turn to the book of Ephesians chapter 3. I want you to see a few of these with your own eyes. Ephesians chapter 3, we're going to pick it up in verse 17. But I want to note while you turn or go to that text that though God's love as an abstract value in a sense transcends measurement, there does seem to be a spiritual dimensionality to it, for lack of a better phrase. And I want to look at Ephesians 3, and I want to bring this out with you. And I've touched upon this before, but repetition's a really good teacher. In Ephesians chapter 3, starting at verse 17, we see the Apostle Paul is outlining a prayer that he prayed for the people of Ephesus, the church at Ephesus. I love the writings of Paul because some of them contain prayers that he prayed for those who knew Christ. If you want to learn how to pray, or if you want to go deeper in your life of prayer, just copy and paste the Apostle Paul's verbiage. Take what he says, pray it for people that you know, people that you love. You really can't go wrong praying the inspired, infallible, and inerrant Word of God because the principles are true and they always will be so. Picking it up in verse 17, I'm starting a little bit in, so just kind of catch up with me. He says in Ephesians 3:17, about midway in, I pray that you, being rooted and established in, help me out, love, may have power. Speaking of capacity or ability, together with all the Lord's people to grasp, to understand, to comprehend, to recognize how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. Again, there's something about the love of God. It's immense. It has dimensionality to it. Not that you can literally take out a ruler and go and measure it, but the Apostle Paul is drawing upon that principle and saying, I pray that you people really begin to understand the height of God's love, in the depth of God's love, in the width of the thing, and the length of the thing. And every time I hear those fourfold dimensional words, I always think of the following. And this is based on a sermon that I heard years ago, so I can't take credit for this. His love is wide enough to embrace the whole of humanity, transcending race. His love is high enough to reach the greatest among us, the saintliest and the elite. His love is long enough in that it is timeless, spanning the whole of eternity. And this is the point that I want to focus on this morning a bit. His love is deep enough to embrace the most sinful, and here's the key phrase of the morning, and the least among us. The least among us. You see, every society has what I call throwaway classes of people. I mean that. Now, it might vary culture to culture and society to society. In other words, the people who are throwaway in one culture may not be in the other. But every society has throwaway classes of people. Those that respectable people shun, dismiss, avoid, scorn, or judge. And I want to put before you this morning that we as Christians need to take stock regarding how Christ treated such a person. Again, his love has a height and a width and a length, but also a depth, that he's willing to love the lowliest, the most broken, the one that has the least ability to give anything meaningful back. I want to look this morning, and I want to spend a lot of time in the Word with the time that I have, looking at different encounters in the Gospels that Jesus had with people who were truly the least. That make sense? Beautiful. Let's go to the Gospel of Luke. They will all come from the Gospel of Luke. I have too much Bible. Please download the notes. I'm not going to have the opportunity to go through all of these. I would be here for an hour. Please spend the time on your own. If you want to go deeper, it can't be just Sunday mornings, gang. And if you're looking for a way to get into the Word, just download the notes. There's so many Bible verses that you can it's free. Just take it, run with it, and go deeper on your own. But I want to pick it up in Luke chapter 7. Now, we, in all full disclosure, covered this account about a month ago, but from a different perspective. But I want to look at it again anyway. And I want to look at it through the filter of Jesus ministering to, serving, and showing love to someone who was considered the least or among the least of society. Luke chapter 7, starting at verse 11, says that afterward Jesus went to a town called Nain. and his disciples, and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out. Now, Luke gives some specificity as to what we know about this person. The only son of his mother, and she was a what? A widow. And a large crowd from the town was with her. And I want to just stop there for a moment. Because again, we can read a text thousands of years later. We can just blow through this whole account in 30 seconds and move on. But you have to read it in the light of the time, of the culture, and in the emotional capacity that it has. We hear the word widow, and likely our heart goes out to that person a bit. And that's because we are just naturally in our culture informed to some degree by a Judeo-Christian ethic. But I want you to remove that. And I want you to consider for a moment how the ancients of this time considered widows. To be a widow in that culture, to have no husband and you've lost your only son, would have put you in an extremely perilous situation. Why? Because women didn't work back then in the sense of going out to get a job to bring income into the home. What was the future of this woman? I want you to put yourself in her shoes. Ladies, in the sound of my voice, I want you to think this is your life. You had a husband. He's gone. All you have left now is a son, but that son is dead. Now, I want you to think of the emotional trauma of losing a child. I can't even begin to fathom that. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I have performed many funerals at this point. There is no sound like the sound of a mother who has lost her child. There's nothing else like it. Now, you compound that by the fact you have no future. You have no means of having a livelihood. There's no welfare state. There's no check coming in from a governmental agency. It's just you. Now, you could say she could rely upon the charity of others. Well, this is how the others would have perceived her. She must have done something real bad to offend the Lord. Because if she lost her husband and her son, it must be because God doesn't really dig her too much anymore. And if God has little use for her, she's not worthy of any tenderness from us. Now, you're in those shoes. Don't answer out loud, but what do you feel? If society and the different classes of people could be likened to a ladder, this woman is on an exceedingly low rung. But Jesus, and that's the key this morning, is looking at how the Lord interacted with such a one. Verse 13, when the Lord saw her, I love this, his heart went out to her. And I've said this before, what he says is ridiculous in the moment. What does he tell her? I'm going to give you some friendly advice. Now, if this is repetition, just deal with it. If you're ever at a funeral, and there is a mother who is burying her child, please don't go to her and say, don't cry. You are likely to be run out of town and run over. But Jesus knew what was coming next. And in a moment of not only tenderness, but power, it says he went up and he touched the bier that they were carrying him on. And the bearer stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. And in the power of the Lord, the dead man sat up and he began to talk. And Jesus, it says, gave him back to his mother. Now, this is a profound text for many reasons, but the one reason that I want to emphasize is I want you to consider how Jesus treated the lowly of society, the least. A person that would have been kept a bit at arm's length, shunned a bit, somewhat outcast, certainly someone who was accursed by God. But we see Jesus reaching out to someone even like her. I'm building an argument this morning. Let's go on to the next one. And this one might be a little bit surprising. Let's go to Luke chapter 18. Turn the page, a few pages to your right. Luke 18. I'm taking you somewhere with this, I promise. I hope. No. Luke 18. We've considered Christ and widows. Now I want to change gears. Luke 18, starting in verse 15. People were also bringing what to Jesus? Babies. Who doesn't love babies? They're adorable. People were also bringing babies to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. When the disciples saw this, they were overjoyed at the heart of the Master to be willing to pray for such as those. What does it say? What did the disciples do? They rebuked them. Back off, Mom and Dad. Jesus is busy right now. But Jesus called the children to him and said, let the little children come to me. Don't hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Now, this is a rather interesting text because, again, if you're going to access it, you have to realize a few things. We, in our culture, prioritize children, correct? For the most part, minus the ones that we've aborted. But we prioritize those who at least live. To the nth degree. We have now a whole class of people called helicopter parents. Don't be that, by the way. Different topic for a different time. But in ancient times, the little ones did not occupy a revered rung in the ladder of society. In fact, great people and people of prominence did not engage or deal with little ones, as these kinds of figures had more meaningful ways to spend their time. And we see this reflected in the disciples. Keep those little kids away from Jesus. Why? He's got better stuff to do. He's traveling, he's preaching, he's dealing with adults. Children should be seen and not really heard. The Master is too busy. But what does Jesus do when some of the least of society came to him or wanted to come to him? He let him in. And I love what he says. Suffer the little children, according to the King James. Let them come. Why? You ready? This is deep. Because I love them. We see Jesus dealing with widows, and now in this context, we see Jesus dealing with kids. And again, the disciples would have been scratching their heads because great teachers and great rabbis, they really would not have condescended and wasted their time. But Jesus does this. And in fact, he even elevates the kids by saying, you should aspire to be like this because the kingdom belongs to such as these, using them as a positive example of faith, innocence, and beyond. I have to move on. Let's go to chapter 5, same book, Luke 5. I'm having you skip all around Luke because I want you to see with your own eyes. This is not a one-off topic. This is how Jesus lived his life. Luke chapter 5. I believe we covered this one somewhat recently too. Starting at verse 12, Luke chapter 5, verse 12. It says, while Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along covered with, help the pastor out, end of verse 12, with leprosy. Get a mental image of this gentleman. And if you don't know what leprosy is, I would say Google it, but I would be careful because it's disturbing imagery. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And I want you to hear the pain and the longing in this man's voice just to be normal. Just to be able to be a part of the society, just to be a part of the culture. Because again, if you had leprosy in ancient times, and I've hit this drum recently, but I'll hit it again, your life was over. You could be worth a lot of money and have a position of power, but if you came down with leprosy, all of that was gone. And you were doomed to spend your life on the fringes of society, devoid of any physical contact or friendship, except for other people who were also leprous. So your time is always spent around people who are dying. You know, I really esteem those of you in the medical profession who work with sick people and people who are dying all the time. That takes a toll. If that's your whole world, though, and you never get to punch out and go home and experience the normalcy of a handshake, the holding of a hand, a hug, any degree of human tenderness. What's not just the physical toll of leprosy and not just the social toll, but the emotional and the spiritual decay that must set in. This guy's life was over. But he sees Jesus a possible way out, and he begs him, do something about this if you are willing. Now, verse 13 is significant because, again, Luke has a precision in his writing. With his background as a physician, he includes a lot of detail. It says, Jesus reached out his hand and did what? He touched the man. That's not there by accident. Luke wants you to see something in the ministry of Jesus Christ. I wonder how long it had been since anyone touched this man. We take it for granted, don't we? You come in, I shake your hand if I'm at the front door. Some of my huggers in the sound of my voice, you go in for a hug and it's allowed, go for it. The appropriate Bible school side hug, depending on your gender. You have a wife, you have a spouse, you have kids, you hug them. We're very physical beings. Sever all of that. For who knows how long? Was it months? Was it years? We don't know. But we know that Jesus touched the man and he said something that is so profound. I am willing. Be clean. And it says, immediately the leprosy left him. We see Jesus dealing with widows. What was his posture toward widows? One of love. We see Jesus dealing with kids. What was Jesus' posture toward kids who were among the least of society? It was one of love. We see Jesus dealing with a leper, someone who was physically decrepit. What was Jesus' posture towards such a one? It was love. I'm going to advance the story. Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8. Stay with me, gang. Don't grow weary from spending too much time in the Bible. The Apostle Paul preached an entire night. Somebody fell out of the window, died. Paul goes down, resurrects him. You know what Paul did? He went back to getting into the Word. So we can give the Lord a half hour. Luke chapter 8, picking it up in verse 26. Says they, speaking of Christ and his apostles, sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. Verse 27. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a prominent individual from the town who was just wonderful to be around. No. He was met by a guy you would never invite into your home if you had any sense. This is not the kind of guy you invite over for a dinner party. But he was met by, help me out, what kind of a man? One who was demon-possessed. I'm going to ask this question somewhat carefully. Have you ever hung out with a person who was demon-possessed that you knew was demon-possessed? Oh, it's a frightening bunch. I mean that. Now, I believe that we hang around with people who are spiritually oppressed and we don't even perceive it. But this guy was obvious. It says for a long time this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house. But he lived, where did he live? In the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus? Son of the Most High God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him. And though he was chained, hand and foot, and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Again, this is not a guy that respectable people have anything to do with. This is the bottom rung of society in many regards. But Jesus is interacting with him. What is your name? And he gives one of the creepiest responses in the whole Bible. Legion, he replied, for we are many, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. Longer story short, Jesus deals with this situation. Skip down to verse 34. Because those demons were essentially cast into a herd of pigs. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, and what's his condition? He's sitting at the feet of Jesus, dressed. I wonder how long this guy had been running around with no clothes for. Hey, Tommy's dressed. He's wearing clothes. Put yourself into the story. What was this guy's life like? He's dressed and in his right mind, and this is so tragic. And they were afraid. And what ends up happening is they ask Jesus, what you did was awesome for Tommy. I'm giving him a name, of course. But can you leave? Because, this is just too crazy for us. We're going to go a different way. It shows you something about human nature. But this was a man who was broken in every sense of the word. You think of a way that a human can be broken, dysfunctional, unlovable. This guy's it. But look at what Jesus does for him. He sets him free. He came to liberate him. He brings this guy to a place and to a posture where he can sit at his feet, he can receive some truth, his mind is back, he's clothed, which is a huge step forward for this gentleman. This guy went from being on the very bottom rung to what would become a functional part of society. And he was called by Christ to go forth and to be a witness to that community because Jesus went on. And this guy wanted to go with him, but Christ said, no, you stay and you testify to what God has done in, through, and for you, because you can do so much more work here among your community than if you came with me, in a sense. But what we see is that Jesus' love for the widow, for the children, and now for this guy is fully apparent. Jesus loving those who were completely unlovable. Do I have time for one more verse? Great. Luke chapter 19. Final one. Luke chapter 19. We see Christ interacting with all kinds of people, the bottom rungs of society. Let's go to one final account. Because you really can't talk about this topic without talking about Zacchaeus. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Verse 2 of Luke 19. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. What was his job? He was what? He was a chief tax collector. He's a big wheel. And what else does it say about him subsequent to that? And he was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was. Again, at this point, there's no internet, no social media, no phones, nothing. But word travels. And sometimes gossip travels faster than social media anyway. So Jesus has a reputation. And whenever he goes near an area, the word spreads and people want to come see what's all the fuss about. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he couldn't see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. Why? I must stay at your house today. Now again, social culture and custom. For you to go into someone's home and do something like share a meal, that's a big deal in our culture. If someone invites you over for dinner, what does that communicate? What does that convey? If someone says, come to my place next Sunday, we're going to do dinner, we'll do a meal, we'll spend some time. What does that make you feel? Loved, appreciated, special. It was much more intense in that culture because you didn't just let anybody into your home. You let people into your home and you spent time with people that you cared about, loved, and had the most esteem and appreciation for. So for Jesus to say, I'm coming to your house, all of the people in the community would have said, what in the world is Jesus doing? Because Zacchaeus was someone who was unlovable. This is a guy, again, people of quality and morality would never have had him around. I've shared this before. The ancient peoples despised tax collectors because they were corrupt, they were in service to a pagan people, they were notorious criminals in a sense. Sinners and tax collectors is a common phrase that you will see to refer to the worst of the worst. But Jesus comes as such a one. Zacchaeus, get down from that tree, you look ridiculous. Come here for a second. Because I'm going to your house today. And look at his response. Verse 8. Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Do you realize what that simple gesture of love did to the heart of Zacchaeus? Jesus didn't preach a fancy sermon. Notice that. Jesus didn't do anything except for invite himself over for dinner, which I love. I'm coming to your place today, Zacchaeus. I hope you have some food to feed me. And this guy is so overwhelmed by what he has just experienced that someone loved him. He has such an inward transformation that he immediately repents, even without saying the words. And he makes the determination to be a different kind of person, to the degree he's willing to give half of everything off of the bat to the poor, and he's willing to pay people back 4 times what he jabbed from them in the first place. What do you think happened to his bank account the next day? He probably gave a lot away. He probably lost his status as someone of great wealth. And look at what Jesus says in verse 9. Today, salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. I'm going to paraphrase that final verse. For I came to save someone just like this. The least of these. The least of these. We see over a series of accounts Jesus showing affection for, engaging, serving kids, widows, the sick, the possessed, and with Zacchaeus, the sinful and the outcast. We see in his life an unconditional nature to the love of God, because that love was not founded on the worthiness or the utility of these people. It was founded upon no condition at all. It was just freely given. And we see an immensity to that love because it was offered freely to those who were the very least. It's easy to love the lovable. Anybody can do that. But Jesus goes to the next level, and he loves the unlovable. Now, as I begin to close, and that's not a pastoral lie, maybe you're thinking to yourself, Pastor, good stories, thanks for sharing, but what's the point? What's the application? Well, there's a few potentially. Maybe I am sharing this to stimulate some worship. Again, don't forget, according to the recent weeks, we worship the Lord for who he is. So as we see his love in operation, that should draw forth an expression from our hearts. But that's not why I'm preaching the sermon. Number 2, perhaps I'm sharing this that you might understand God's love for you. It is amazing how many people are Christians, but they just cannot receive the fact that God loves someone like them. That's probably a good half of the audience in the sound of my voice. Just when push comes to shove, you are not convinced that God loves you. Maybe he tolerates you. Maybe now and then he likes to talk with you, but you don't understand at the heart level the degree to which he loves you. It is my prayer that starting today, moving forward, you would understand the height and the length and the width and the depth of that thing called the love of God. Because if you can grasp that at the heart level, that will have a transformative effect on every facet of life and living. But that's not why I'm preaching the sermon either. So let me tell you why I am. I am sharing these truths because we must recognize our responsibility before God to live in such a way. Hear me on this. If we belong to Christ, and if we are called by his name, we are accountable to follow in his example. Now, we use the term Christian very lightly in our culture. Everybody's a Christian. 86% of people claim to be Christians, whatever that means. But if we really are Christians in the biblical sense of that word, here's what that means. We follow in his footsteps. We are to operate in the kind of humility that Jesus operated in. We are to operate in the kind of selflessness that Jesus operated in. We are to operate in the spirit of love that Jesus demonstrated, which means, like it or not, if we're going to be believers, we have an accountability before the Lord to love the kind of people that even Jesus loved. Hard to love at times. Be honest with me, but don't amen too loudly. How many of you know people that are hard to love? It's just the way it is. Our society has entire classes of people that we are willing to throw away. They're out there. They might be surrounded by people at all times, but they are isolated. They are somehow severed from the rest of society because they're lowly, they're poor, they're broken, they're outcast, they're wretched. They're the kind of people no one wants to do anything with other than shun them and keep them at arm's length. But if we are going to allow the love of Christ to impact us, it also has to flow through us to others. Thank you. Twofold application. Every Christian, that's you, if you bear that name, must wrestle with the application of these principles. You have to be willing to do an inventory, gang, of what kind of person am I, and do I, not does my spouse, not does the pastor, do I manifest the kind of love that I see in the ministry of Jesus? What's my posture toward the least of these? How do I respond to such a one? Am I the one who's willing to go out of my way to serve such a one? To share a meal with such a one? To talk with such a one? To recognize the inherent dignity and worth of such a one, because no matter how vile they may be, they were still made in the image of God and still have value that is incalculable. Final point. Every church must wrestle with these questions as well. It's not enough for us to say as a church, God loves us, the end. And it's also not enough to say God loves us and we should love others. We need to find strategic ways to show that love. And the timing of this sermon is not accidental. I believe that God has impressed this message upon my heart in light of some things to come. And again, this ties into the informational meeting that I want to have in the days ahead. For over a year, the board of this assembly has prayerfully considered and researched the establishment of a sober house. We'll talk more about what that means in the days ahead, but let me just say that this house will be designed specifically for women who are in transition or crisis. In an age when substance abuse, chemical addiction, domestic violence, prostitution, human trafficking, and beyond are truly at epidemic levels, it is necessary for the Church of Jesus Christ, individually and corporately, to consider what is an effective response. And after a year of discussion behind the scenes and prayer and consideration, we believe it's time for the church to take some steps of faith moving forward and to begin to bring a long-held dream to reality. We'll have an informational meeting taking place on Sunday, November 24th, following the service. This meeting is going to touch upon just a series of bird's-eye level things, the genesis of this idea, the vision for it, the need for such a house, next steps, and more. It'll give you an opportunity to hear the heart of the board, to hear the heart of Tracy in particular, as she was the one who approached the board well over a year ago now in this direction. It'll give us a chance to consider, is this a step that we can take, or as we take this step, can the Lord use it to truly impact and reach the least of these? Now, it is worth noting that this meeting, and I just had this written down, so I want to read it, will likely be followed by some form of formal action at the annual meeting taking place in January of 2020. So I will say, since you can expect to hear more on this topic in the days ahead, please avail yourself of the opportunity to come, to listen, to ask questions, and to allow the Lord to bring you to a place where you have some buy-in, because it's not going to be enough for a handful of people to like this idea at the board level. It has to be a church-wide thing that we say the Lord is in this. So November 24th, following the service, we're going to spend some time talking about this very idea, because in an age of throwaway people, we should be the kind of people who go around saying, we'll love that one. We'll give that one a place to sleep. We'll give that one a place to get their lives together and help them move forward. No church can do everything, but every church can do something. And this is a big step in that direction. That being said, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make it